Schwester.
Hi.
Hey, where is Marco? Talk.
Marco is just joining.
Yeah.
Okay.
Will I join you
Guys,
just show me one
this is
after?
it's going live.
Okay.
Now? Oh my God, it's been on time.
You can start talking.
Um, Good morning, everywhere, and thank you for joining us, no matter where you are in the world, for this report launch on tech-facilitated violence against LGBTQ people in Uganda. This report documents how the Anti-Homosexuality Act, AHA 2023, has entrenched discrimination and technology-facilitated gender-based violence against LGBTQ Ugandans. It shows how widespread the issue is and has significantly altered their digital presence and behaviors, and has had devastating consequences of their rights to freedom of expression and association, as well as the right to be free from discrimination, torture, and other ill treatment. The impact of tech-facilitated gender-based violence on LGBTQ Ugandans has led them to deactivate their accounts, to delete or censor their posts, and follow accounts that could provide them with LGBTQ content. And all this is being done for fear of being outed, for fear of being physically attacked, fear of losing their jobs and their homes, among other fears. It has also limited the content that is shared by organizational websites. Most organizations that work on LGBTQ rights or are allies to LGBTQ Ugandans. This, in the long run, has also had a negative impact on the provision of sexual and reproductive health services to LGBTQ Ugandans. Through this virtual press conference, we will take you through the methodology that was behind this piece of work, as well as the key findings that are highlighted in the report that is already online for your consumption. During the report launch, we will also have a poem reading by an LGBTQ activist that was part of this research. We will have a message from the UN independent expert on SOGI rights. There will be an overview of where this piece of work focusing on Uganda is situated within a bigger campaign that Amnesty is running to ensure that online spaces are safe for women, girls, and LGBTQ people across the world. Finally, we're joined by Geoffrey Ongwaro, who is a program officer at Uganda Key Populations Consortium, who will share a bit about what is happening in Uganda and the impact it's having on LGBTQ people online and offline. At the end of it all, there will be an opportunity for a Q&A session. So please listen in, jot down some notes. If some questions pop up, feel free to throw them in the chat for those that are attending this webinar, and our panelists will be available to respond to them towards the end of this session. That said, I would like to invite one of my colleagues to play the poem. It's a poem called Painful Difference. It's been written by one of the activists in Uganda, showing how hard it is right now to be an LGBTQ person in Uganda. After that, I'll call upon Tigere Chaguta, who is our regional director for the East and South and Regional Office, to give the welcoming remarks. Karibuni, welcome. Apologies for the silence. So I believe the poem is showing on the live stream and not on the webinar, which we are in. So I think while that is going, or if that is fixed, we can ask Tigger to jump in and to give the welcoming remarks.
Hi, Juniper. Can you hear me? All right. Shall I proceed? Colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us. Thank you for joining us today. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to share this moment with you as we launch Amnesty International's new report, Everybody Here is Having Two Lives or Phones, the devastating impact of criminalization on digital spaces for LGBTQ people in Uganda. This report is part of our global Make It Safe Online campaign to protect the rights to protest for women, girls, and LGBT people. The report comes in the wake of escalation in anti-LGBTQ legislation and violence in the region. As of June 2024, consensual same-sex activity is criminalized in 30 out of Africa's 54 nations. In 2019, Botswana's High Court ruled in favor of activists seeking to eliminate jail sentences for same-sex relationships, deeming such penalties unconstitutional. The judgment also held that laws that criminalize consensual same-sex are unconstitutional, discriminatory, and against public interest. Despite the government's attempt to overturn the ruling, the appeal was unsuccessful in 2021. More recently, the Namibian High Court has declared unconstitutional colonial-era laws criminalizing consensual sex between men. The state also took that on appeal. While there have been notable achievements in this area in some countries in the region, in others, the environment has become more hostile for LGBTQ individuals. This includes criminalization of consensual same-sex activity, advocacy of hatred, and restricted access to essential healthcare services, which have all contributed to an increasingly dangerous and repressive climate for LGBTQ communities. In Kenya, for instance, criminalization of consensual same-sex sexual activity was unsuccessfully challenged at the High Court of Kenya in 2019. The High Court declined to strike down the criminalization and found related sections of the country's penal code to be consistent with the Constitution of Kenya. In Tanzania, sexual acts between men are already criminalized under the country's penal law and carry a maximum of 30 years in prison. Despite this being one of the harshest prison sentences for consensual same-sex activity, there is still a growing wave of pressure from various groups in the country, including religious organizations and political leaders, for harsher punishments for homosexuality, including the death penalty. In Uganda, which is the country that is the subject of our report today, Amnesty International has documented countless stories of technology-facilitated gender-based violence against LGBTQ people carried out by state and non-state actors. These attacks have increased with the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act in May 2023 and the continued failure of the Ugandan authorities to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of LGBTQ people. As we launch this report today, we demand that the Ugandan government acts now to make it safe online for LGBTQ people. Colleagues, in conclusion, and by no means the least, we pay tribute to and thank all the brave interviewees and our partner organizations, and of course, the very resilient LGBTQ communities in Uganda for trusting us with the stories of their lived realities that are contained in this report and will be shared here today. And therefore, I look forward to fruitful deliberations as we officially launch this report, and I invite all of you to engage with us as we try and work together to make it safe for LGBTQ people online. I thank you. Thank you, Juniper, and it's back to you.
Thank you, Tigger, for those welcoming remarks and also for highlighting how this is not an issue that just faces LGBTQ Ugandans. There's a worrying trend across Africa and across the region where human rights, specifically those of LGBTQ people, are under attack from not only governments and the public in general, but also from actors, anti-right actors who are intentionally working towards ensuring that these people are discriminated upon and do not fully enjoy their human rights. That said, since we're not sure that we were able to stream the poem, I will request that we stream the poem from LGBTQ activists at this point before we move to the recording by Grammy Reid, who is the UN independent expert on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. Shrestha or George, over to you for the poem.
Sorry, I think the video was playing without sound. Let me just restart it.
Sad for my soul, for I have done wrong to love. For they know not that love is love. My country has abandoned me, for I loved a man as old as me. For both we are he. A rainbow painted red, because we are considered dead. In their eyes, we are nonsense, and killing us is sense. To who I am is no longer my point to make, but theirs. My vibrant spirit feels so torn beneath the weight of others' scorn, hate, and malice. I'm wrongfully judged. Even worse, I have been caged, termed deadly and evil, for they use the holy book to make me a rebel, and so shamefully preach love for all, yet am not included in their all.
Thank you, Shrestha, for that. And just to also say thank you to the activists who did this great piece for us, because just by writing this poem is an act of defiance and protest in itself. Him using his skills just to speak out and to let people know that he is here, he's proud of who he is. We're grateful that we've been able to provide a platform for him to do this. That said, we will move on to the remarks by the independent expert on SOGI, Mr. Grammy Reid. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Just to quickly check, should I play it or will the live streaming company play it?
It's being played by the live streaming company.
Okay, we can't see it here.
Digital platforms are designed to facilitate connection. For lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and other gender diverse people, this can be a lifeline. Online connection is especially important in repressive environments where it is difficult to associate openly with others. It may be something as simple as connecting with another and realizing that you are not alone. Or for human rights defenders, the digital sphere may be one of the few viable spaces to organize and advocate against discrimination and violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And yet, what should be a safe space is often not. Far from it. Online spaces are increasingly perilous ones, and even more so in hostile environments. I am Graham Reed, United Nations independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And I'm honored to be invited to say a few words at the launch of Amnesty International's report entitled "Everybody Here is Having Two Lives and Two Phones: The Devastating Impact of Criminalization on Digital Spaces for LGBTQ People in Uganda." This is part of a series of reports that investigates the effects of technology-facilitated gender-based violence in different countries. It is very timely. In June of this year, I presented a report to the Human Rights Council on the proliferation of laws and policies that restrict freedoms of expression, peaceful assembly, and association, including the 2023 Anti-Homosexuality Act in Uganda. My report also examines the harmful and misleading rhetoric that is almost invariably used by lawmakers to justify the imposition of restrictive legislation, so-called propaganda laws or promotion of homosexuality laws, foreign agent laws that curtail the ability of individuals to express their identities in the public sphere and inhibit organizations from doing their work. In my report, I noted that, and I quote, "The justifications that lawmakers give for imposing legal restrictions based on sexual orientation and gender identity violate rights in two ways. They both unfairly restrict rights and contribute to a hostile and discriminatory environment which generates violence attacks and discriminatory practices by non-state actors." These pejorative rationales include misrepresenting LGBT persons as a threat to children, the family, or traditional values. Another spurious justification for denying rights is to deceptively suggest that LGBT persons are a symptom of foreign influence or a threat to national sovereignty or security, end quote. Hostile and discriminatory rhetoric serves to stigmatize and scapegoat LGBT people. My report includes a section on the digital sphere, noting how these laws and policies have negative impacts and restrict the ability of human rights defenders to operate and undertake their legitimate and necessary work. To put this into context, in 2024, at least 60 UN member states had laws that restricted the right to freedom of expression, and at least 59 states had laws that restricted or could be used to restrict the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Amnesty International's report on Uganda, launched today, reads as a case study of the kinds of abuses that arise in the face of repressive legislation, combined with hostile political rhetoric and scapegoating of vulnerable groups. It's an accomplished report and a disturbing read. It shows vividly that, whether the law is actively enforced or not, its consequences are wide-ranging and oftentimes devastating. This report documents the damaging outcomes of the latest iteration of the Anti-Homosexuality Act of 2023. But the report does so much more because it also situates the law and the abuses that arise as a result of the law in a context of economic precarity, state retreat from providing adequate social services, and scapegoating for political ends. It shows how discrimination and violence directed against LGBT people are symptoms of broader social, economic, and political trends. In some senses, the report addresses a minority rights issue. In another, it addresses a disturbing trend that should be of concern to all. Widespread discrimination and violence documented in the report is a symptom of the manifold ways in which the basic human rights of LGBT people have been undermined. A symptom of the perpetual scapegoating that LGBT people in Uganda have experienced. A symptom of the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2023. A symptom of the activities of groups who work against the universality and indivisibility of human rights, especially when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity. The abuses described in the Amnesty International report are a consequence of discriminatory laws, hostile social attitudes in the context of the political and economic situation in Uganda at this time. The threat of human rights abuses, including arbitrary arrests, unlawful detentions, evictions, and loss of employment, are all too real for LGBT people in Uganda. In this environment, online privacy is even more important. Yet the Anti-Homosexuality Act in Uganda infringes on fundamental human rights, including
I believe we've lost the connection. Yes, the video seems to have hung. Apologies for the slight technological hitches here and there. We're all trying to figure this out. And thank you for staying with us as we continue with the launch. I am not sure if we are still continuing on the live stream, but since the recording has stopped, I think we will now jump to Rebecca, who is our colleague at Amnesty Tech, to situate this piece of work in Uganda within a greater campaign that shows how women and girls and LGBTQI people across the globe are not only using the digital spaces to protest, to be activists, but also how their action on these digital spaces is leading to them being repressed by different actors. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, Juniper. It's fantastic to be here for this brilliant launch. I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me. Okay. We'll see that. Yeah, so my name's Becca, and I work at Amnesty Tech, which is part of the Amnesty International Secretariat that, in a nutshell, works at the intersection and interaction of human rights and technology. So when doing this, it's really critical that we look at how technology affects different people differently, especially the most marginalized. And of course, that includes taking an intersectional lens and looking at gender too. So this project, as we've already heard, is part of Amnesty's flagship long-term Protect the Protest campaign on the right to protest. So that encompasses not just the traditional images that might pop up when you think about taking part in a protest, but also fundamentally it's about the right to express yourself and gather and come together. So why this project? Why this campaign? Why was it conceived? As Juniper said, we know that the digital space has become increasingly important as a tool for women, girls, and LGBTI people to network, to facilitate the exercise of their rights offline, but also where these online spaces themselves become places where rights can be exercised directly. So digital spaces are used to communicate, share and access information, coordinate action, advocate, and raise awareness, among other things. And crucially, when civic space is shrinking and being restricted offline, then this online space becomes even more important. And there are many forms of innovative protest online that allow women, girls, and LGBTI people and other marginalized groups to draw attention to issues they're facing in their own voices. Okay, so here are some examples of some of these innovative forms. So we've got hashtag campaigns, online petitions, information sharing, blogs, and of course, social media posts. And these have been used all over the world. And you'll have heard, I'm sure, of #MeToo campaign and the various iterations in different contexts around the world. Bring Back Our Girls, Women to Drive, Cane, Saudi Arabia, Ni Una Menos in the Americas, and all of these have led to action for social change and dialogue. But at the same time, activism in this online civic space brings with it new threats and risks and challenges. So states have resorted to different tactics, including network shutdowns, surveillance, censorship, criminalization, that significantly curtails the exercise of the right to protest, the right to freedom of expression, assembly, and association in online spaces. Now, I wanted to focus particularly on TFGBV, which has already been mentioned, technology-facilitated gender-based violence, because this is one of the key ways in which women, girls, and LGBTI people are being silenced and punished. So what is TFGBV? Broadly, it refers to the range of ways that different types of tech are being used to cause particular kinds of harm to women, girls, and LGBTI people. And this is both within and beyond online spaces. We're not using the term online GBV because it's broader than that, includes that kind of violence that relies on technology but doesn't necessarily always happen online. So this can be strangers on the internet, people you know, including partners, and it can obviously be orchestrated by governments and authorities too. And some of the most common forms of TFGBV, which my colleagues will go on to talk about, that include doxing, harassment, abusive and hateful speech, outing, blackmail, non-consensual imaging, and targeted surveillance. So the fact that it's facilitated by tech means this violence can be carried out with anonymity and without having to be anywhere near the survivor, not even in the same country. And by its very nature, it allows that content to be really easily amplified and to remain in perpetuity. So it's really important to stress that this is a global phenomenon. It doesn't just happen in Uganda or Thailand or global majority countries. It's happening in every single country in the world, and no states anywhere are doing enough to tackle this. So there's lots of stats here on the slide. I won't go through them all, but global estimates have found that 85% of women who spend time online have witnessed online violence, and 38% of women have been targets of online violence. And while TFGBV impacts all women, girls, and LGBTI people, those facing intersectional forms of discrimination and systemic marginalization, including on the basis of disability, religion, caste, ethnicity, class, age, race, they may face unique and also compounded forms of TFGBV. So you can see here that women of color are more likely than white women to be mentioned in abusive content, and Black women, studies have shown, have been disproportionately targeted, a whopping 84% more likely than white women to be mentioned in abusive tweets. So not only is it more dangerous for women, girls, and LGBTI people to engage in online conversations, it can also lead to really severe harms. So the impacts: digital violence creates a chilling effect where activists, human rights defenders begin to self-censor, and in some cases to just disengage from human rights work or even communicating online altogether. And what's important to point out here is you don't have to be targeted directly for this to affect you or for it to intimidate you or discourage you from speaking out. And psychological harms include conditions like PTSD, paranoia, depression, anxiety. That can also lead to self-harm. And it can lead people, as I mentioned, to isolate themselves. And that can really harm their access to information and services as well as community. So despite all of these significant harms, we've found that this issue hasn't received sufficient legislative or policy attention anywhere in the world. And this project's born out of this fact. So So back to the main Make It Safe Online project, our global project at Amnesty. So this is obviously involving many teams in our movement. And we've been documenting this phenomenon with initially 3 case studies. So the Thailand case study on Thailand was launched in May, along with the global launch of this campaign. The report was called Being Ourselves is Too Dangerous, Digital Violence and the Silencing of Women and LGBTI Activists in Thailand. Obviously, now we have this incredible Uganda report and launch and campaign, and then this will be followed with forthcoming research focusing on Canada and TFGBV faced by people in Black, Indigenous and other racialized communities. Based on our research and what we've heard from affected groups and CSOs who we've worked closely with, we are calling on all governments to ensure that women, girls and LGBTI people can carry out activism, exercise their right to protest safely using tech. And for this to be possible, governments must work with a range of stakeholders to ensure that digital spaces are secure. A digital security hub that we've launched. You can find it at securitylab.amnesty.org. It was a really key component of the project. It's a much needed resource. So it was initiated at the start of this project. It's basically a repository of resources to support activists and civil society with the tools they need to help them stay safe online. Currently, I think we have resources in 57 languages covering censorship, digital security, resilience, surveillance. And we hope with this hub, it makes it that little bit easier to identify non-overwhelming, accessible and updated resources to support you with your digital security and resilience. So I'm going to stop there, stop share. Now it would, I think my colleagues are going to play a video, a very short video, which we produced at the launch of the Make It Safe Online campaign. And it was shot in Thailand. It features 3 Thai activists talking about their experiences of TFGBV. Thank you.
Shrestha, can you assist with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
ประเทศไทยเป็นประเทศที่เก่งมากในการนำเสนอภาพลักษณ์ที่ดีต่อทั่วโลกนะคะโดยเฉพาะในเรื่องของสิทธิมนุษยชนแต่ในภาพเป็นจริงมีการละเมิดสิทธิมนุษยชนโดยเจ้าหน้าที่รัฐคือเราพบว่าจริงๆแล้วอ่ะเหมือนเขาจะให้สิทธิ์เราพูดแต่ว่ามันถูกจำกัดมากเราไม่มีสิทธิ์รู้เลยว่าวันที่เราพูดเรื่องราวเหล่านี้ออกไปอ่ะเราจะถูกทำให้หายไปหรือเปล่าก็คือหลังจากการใช้ออนไลน์การใช้สื่อออนไลน์การใช้เพื่อการสื่อสารในเรื่องของปัญหาการละเมิดสิทธิมนุษยชนทั้งเรื่องของการเกิดการทรมานมันก็เลยนำไปสู่การที่มีกลุ่มคนกลุ่มหนึ่งโจมตีทาง Facebook เราโดนคุกคามในโลกออนไลน์เพราะเราออกมาเรียกร้องพื้นที่ปลอดภัยให้ LGBTQ ที่นับถือศาสนาอิสลามมีเอาภาพไปแขวนในพื้นที่3จังหวัดเนาะแล้วก็บอกว่าเนี่ยถ้าอีนี่ลงมา3จังหวัดอะจับตามันหน่อยนะจับตายเลยอะไรอย่างเงี้ยแล้วก็ถึงขั้นล่าสุดนี่ก็คือแบบต้องเอาไปฆ่าแล้วอะไรอย่างเงี้ยหนูมาเคลื่อนไหวก็คือตอนปี63เนาะถ้าถามว่าสิ่งที่อยากเห็นจริงๆคืออะไรก็คือประเทศที่เราสามารถแบบเหมือนพูดแบบวิจารณ์ได้เราพอวิจารณ์แล้วเสียงของเราก็นำไปสู่การเปลี่ยนแปลงที่ดีขึ้นจริงๆหนูโดนเจาะโดยเพกาซัสทั้งหมด14ครั้งซึ่งเป็นจำนวนที่แบบว่ามากที่สุดในประเทศเนาะก็ผู้หญิงและ LGBT เองอ่ะเข้าใจอย่างดีเลยว่าการที่ถูกกดขี่มันรู้สึกยังไงเพราะฉะนั้นยิ่งเขาถูกแอทแทคด้วยเรื่องเนี้ยเขายิ่งรู้สึกว่ามันยิ่งต้องพูดออกไปให้เสียงดังยิ่งขึ้น
Thank you, Shrestha. And thank you, Rebecca, for highlighting how global of a phenomenon this is and why it's important for us to keep speaking about tech-facilitated gender-based violence, but also standing in solidarity with each other no matter where we are in the world, because this is clearly an issue that is and can affect anyone across the world, no matter where they are. That said, I think let's move on to why we are here today, our Uganda report, which would not have been possible if it was not for the brave LGBTQI activists and organizations in Uganda that stood up and said, yes, we will speak to you about this issue that is affecting us. And they allowed us to provide them with a platform where we can highlight that this is a very big issue in Uganda that must be addressed by not only the government, but also the public who are helping to perpetuate these violations that LGBTQI Ugandans are facing. That said, I'll invite my colleagues. We have Roland Ebole, who is the regional researcher for Uganda and Tanzania, Shrestha Das, who is a researcher and advisor with the gender team, and Marco Perolini, who is our advisor on civic space, to speak about the process that has brought us here today, what we did, who we spoke to allow us to come with this robust piece of research that will guide campaigns and advocacy as we stand in solidarity with LGBTQI Ugandans and organizations. Roland, welcome.
Many thanks, Juniper. Many thanks, colleagues, and again, welcome for this launch. Thank you so much, especially partners and organizations, individuals who really made this possible. My colleagues have been mentioned, and many others are within the organization. Juniper, yourself, with tremendous work you've done in terms of just making this happen. I will start with speaking onto the methodology of this report. And this report basically is based on, desk and in-country research that Amnesty International conducted between June last year, 2023, and February 2024. And in this, research, we basically involved, interviews, and these interviews were conducted in 6 districts or 6 cities in the 4 regions, or the 4 regions, geographical regions of Uganda, thinking about Western Uganda, Central Uganda, Eastern Uganda, and also, the North. And in this research, we actually, really had a focus, looking at the existing gaps regarding human rights impact in the technology-facilitated gender-based violence that has on LGBTQ people, and in contexts where the identities have been criminalized. So in these regions, basically, we selected and, went to get, the sources from cities or places outside Kampala. So in addition to the interviews, what we did as Amnesty, we also reviewed social media posts. We reviewed academic literature, primarily by Ugandan scholars, reports by civil society organizations from Uganda and outside, international media reports, and reports by UN and mechanisms. We also reviewed other secondary sources, looking at legal policy background, especially on digital spaces and LGBTQ rights in Uganda. We looked at human rights reports published by Ugandan and international NGOs. We looked at academic literature focusing on technology-facilitated gender-based violence and its impacts on LGBTQ people in other countries as well, and also analyzed various relevant legislations in the country, regionally and internationally. So we talked about 2023 and, up to this year. So this research started with a scoping phase whereby Amnesty researchers went to the country early in the year, mid-year, September 2023, went around the country to the regions that I've mentioned, to the cities that I've mentioned, got to speak to specific individuals who've been impacted by, not just the Anti-Homosexuality Act, but various other issues that have emerged with regards to discrimination and violence based on the Anti-Homosexuality Act, but also, technology-related violations. And the scoping mission basically informed us on, the exact nature of how to, get into, conducting this research, get into identifying specific individuals, specific locations, specific issues, and specific safety measures that we should be taking as an organization as we interacted with those that we interviewed. So the scoping phase was 18 to 26 of September, and did, the ground research on 17 November to, 17 November to the beginning of December, and further followed it up with other follow-up research that went to 2nd February 2024, which we call the main research. In this research, the research team conducted 53 interviews that were in person. Those are one-on-one interviews. We did a one focus group discussion that had 6 people in Kampala, and 5 online interviews with LGBTQ individuals. And these are human rights defenders, working in that space, and LGBTQ organizations and other civil society organizations working on gender, sexuality, technology, and human rights. In total, we did 57 interviews that were conducted only with LGBTQ individuals, activists and representatives of LGBTQ organizations. Out of, we also did 7 interviews with other civil society organizations, which makes the total interviews that we conducted in Uganda to be 64. Just in terms of number of interviews per the regions in Uganda, as I specified, Entebbe, representing more central, Uganda. We did 6 interviews with LGBTQ individuals, HRDs, and representatives of LGBTQ organizations. In Kampala, also representing more of central, we did 10 interviews there with LGBTQ individuals, HRDs, and representatives of LGBTQ organizations. And I mentioned that we also did 7 civil society organizations interviews. In Fort Portal and surrounding areas, which represent mostly Western Uganda, we did 14 interviews with LGBTQ individuals, human rights defenders, and representatives of LGBTQ organizations. In Jinja, also mostly, Central East, we did 6 LGBTQ interviews with and HRDs and representatives of LGBTQ organizations. Then in Eastern Uganda, basically Mbale, and Mbale really had people also coming from surrounding environments, just like in Fort Portal. We did 11 LGBTQ interviews with individuals, HRDs, and representatives of LGBTQ organizations. Interviewees identified with sexual orientations and, gender identities across the LGBTI spectrums. We had, those who provided information about the sexuality. 21 individuals identified as, cis gay men. We had 6 cis lesbian women. We had 12 transgender. We had 5 queer. And 2 was identified as non-binary, 1 as, cis bisexual man, 1 as cis bisexual woman, and 1 person as LGBTQ. And many of them, as we identified, they mentioned that, their families, could not or, did not know about their sexual orientation, gender identity or expression. So, this is basically a situation that we encountered across, all the regions that we went. All interviewees, of course, were, not of course, but we really got 18 years and above individuals. They and not all of them identified as, human rights defenders or activists. We had a small number that were survivors of online and offline gender-based violence and, were not actively involved in, defending human rights. We also had others who identified as activists, and in many instances, they were actually linked to health and legal services and information. So those who provide legal aid or legal services to the larger LGBTQ, community. Almost all interviewees were from marginalized socioeconomic background. And I think this is one of the things that we really targeted by not focusing on Kampala, but going to the regions and getting to speak or to interview individuals in, those areas in the cities and, the environments many had to come from, villages to where we were meeting. And with this kind of backgrounds, many had limited access to formal education, digital literacy, and financial resources. And this included people that worked as sex workers, peer educators, artists, paralegals, and others, as I mentioned, supporting LGBTQ organization in different capacities, health, legal, and all that. Some interviewees had lost their livelihoods because of being outed as LGBTQ and, discrimination that followed that. And some interviewees reported that, they were really ousted from their families and surviving difficult situations as a result. In this research, we noted that, there are so many other violations that really, are associated with the socioeconomic background that most of the interviews came, from. And this would really include, limited access to support groups and services. We also had, many that, would face as another kind of, violence whereby, with the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act and, the dangers of being outed, received threats of physical violence and related threats. We had security measures followed as Amnesty International, keeping in mind, the feminist ethics of care, and also had informed consent, where, interviews were informed about the research plans and the objectives and, gave the consent. And this obtained consent, we were told whether, when to, the right to stop, rescind consent, be off record, and also, we provided references to organizations that provide legal and psychosocial support whenever asked. To conclude, the research was basically shaped in a very participatory ways, as I mentioned, with input from the scoping exercise that was done. The scoping exercise had 21 individuals. This is away from the ones that we really interviewed, the 64 ones. And various aspects of the interview process, including location and, the format of the interviews and all that was really informed by the scoping. And basically, the researchers really focused on the violations of and attacks, basically looking back from 2019, 2023, and basically because of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, but within the scope of time 2019 looked at when we we started looking at the violations. So Amnesty International is really grateful to all Ugandan LGBTQ persons, activists, HRDs, and organizations who really spoke to Amnesty, and we respect that you spoke to us with at great personal risk, and also we hope that this research contributes to the ongoing efforts to defend the rights of LGBTQ people in Uganda and beyond, and to ensuring that LGBTQ people everywhere can live free of stigma, prejudice, discrimination, and violence. I wanted to be brief. I will stop there and throw it back to you, Juniper. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive breakdown of the methodology and the work that went behind this piece of work, Roland. Shrestha, Marco?
over to you for the key findings of this report.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Roland. I wanted to first of all extend a very warm welcome to everybody here, but especially it's lovely to see all the people, many of the people that we spoke to as a part of this research process being here with us today. As my colleagues have already said, we are all immensely grateful to you for sharing these stories with us at great personal cost, at great security risk. And we genuinely hope that the report and the findings are helpful in continuing the advocacy. And we hope to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and continuing to support the work that's going on in Uganda. With that, I'm going to share a bit about our key findings. Let me just get the presentation. One second. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Perfect, thanks. So before we actually go into the findings, and we've been speaking a lot about the Anti-Homosexuality Act and various other laws, but we must understand that the law cannot be understood in a vacuum at all. And so in this report, what we've tried to do is situate the homophobia and transphobia that we're seeing in Uganda today within broader socio-economical and political context. And there are a range of factors to be considered. Starting with colonization. So even as we see many public figures in Uganda being quick to call homosexuality as a quote-unquote Western imposition, pre-colonial times in Uganda were actually characterized by general tolerance and even acceptance of homosexuality. In fact, same-sex sexual practices in pre-colonial Uganda were never criminalized. And some of the criminalization that we see today is a direct legacy of colonial policy, which continues to affect LGBTQ people till today. However, this is not just limited to colonial times, and the newer iteration of the laws that target LGBTQ people are similarly shaped by the flow of ideology as well as money between several transnational actors. And anti-rights groups are key among these. For instance, in our report, we have noted allegations by secondary sources that have been made against various USA-based anti-rights groups, such as Family Watch International and the Fellowship Foundation or the Family, for their role in adding to anti-LGBTQ sentiments and discrimination in Uganda, as well as supporting the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act. And while these allegations are primarily based on secondary sources, some of the organizations we spoke to reiterated the role of these organizations in fueling discrimination against LGBTQ people in Uganda, both online and offline. Along with this, years of structural adjustment programs that have been implemented by international financial institutions has led to a situation of reduced public spending on public services and generalized economic insecurity in Uganda. This in turn has created opportunities for religious groups in Uganda to provide public services, especially in the field of education and healthcare, which has given them greater influence over public discourse and narrative shaping, especially on the issue of sexuality, as we see today. However, rather than these global narratives and ideologies being merely unidimensionally imposed in Uganda, what we see is that they have been reinterpreted through the lens of local interests, and there is mutual benefit for both domestic and international actors in spreading homophobic propaganda. For instance, we see that instead of meeting its obligations around socio and economic rights, Ugandan religious and political elites have scapegoated LGBTQ people for all the socio-economic lapses. So the constant stream of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric has allowed the state to divert attention from crucial socio-economic issues such as rising unemployment, financial insecurity, corruption, inflation, etc. LGBTQ people often get portrayed as people who are apportioning, diverting money from international funders and are to be blamed for the economic insecurity in Uganda. And as we will discuss later, this has been one of the key factors that have propelled blackmailing against LGBTQ people who are assumed to be having more money because of this supposed international funding. Now, moving on to our key findings, given this background and context, and let's keep that in mind. One of our key findings is that digital spaces have become even more vital in the Ugandan context of extreme criminalization. As my colleagues before, Rebecca, as well as the presentation by Graham Reed, the independent expert on SOGI, have said digital spaces have become really powerful tools for LGBTQ community, but this is especially so in a context of criminalization as we see in Uganda. While people fear attacks and violence in offline spaces, and that limits the possibilities of gathering, social media in turn has become a powerful tool for advocacy and activism within the LGBTQ community in Uganda. We found that a range of digital platforms were being used by LGBTQ people. WhatsApp was the most often used, but also we found Facebook, TikTok, Signal, and other apps being used as well. Digital spaces were primarily being used to raise awareness about how the rights of LGBTQ people are being affected, to sensitize LGBTQ people and others about human rights, to document violations, and to join international and national, regional level advocacy through hashtags as well. It's being used to share information and news within the community, including security risks and threats. But sexual and reproductive health information was the most common form of information that was being shared across platforms, including about upcoming events and camps where sexual health services would be delivered to the LGBTQ community. We also found that by exchanging information, news, advice, pictures, and stories, the LGBTQ people have been able to create a sense of virtual community. And in some way, this also was able to ensure some amount of mental well-being in a context where they're facing so much repression otherwise. We also found that different WhatsApp groups have been set up by LGBTQ communities to provide support to each other, to share urgent updates regarding arrests, threats, blackmail, to share advice, to provide monetary support to each other. If people are moving from one region to another, to provide that kind of support as well. And lastly, digital spaces were also being used to increase visibility and representation. They've become powerful tools for the LGBTQ organizations as well as content creators to increase visibility of LGBTQ issues and ensure a positive, affirmative, and well-rounded self-representation of the LGBTQ community in Uganda. However, despite the various uses of digital spaces, we found that widespread threats and presence of various forms of TFGBV have curtailed the information that can be shared online and the opportunities for LGBTQ people to use digital spaces. In addition, as my colleagues have already mentioned, we found that the Anti-Homosexuality Act that was passed in May 2023 has provided impunity for attacks against LGBTQ people and forced LGBTQ individuals and organizations to significantly alter their digital presence and behavior. So some of the key forms of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, or TFGBV, that we noted in our report include violation of privacy. One of the key forms of violation of privacy is confiscation of devices and access to personal data without consent. We found that if somebody is being suspected of belonging or is either real or perceived belonging to the LGBTQ community, their phones get confiscated, often by the police. Their passwords are forcefully removed. Their data is accessed, and sometimes even their videos that are found on their devices are shared without their consent. The data on these devices are primarily used for blackmailing purposes, both by state authorities as well as by private individuals. In addition, we also found instances of doxing and outing. Doxing refers to revealing personal information about somebody, including their home address, their real name, their phone number, or their email without their consent. Outing refers to revealing whether online or offline a person's sexual orientation or their gender identity or even their HIV status. Our report documents various instances where real names, phone numbers, photos, and places of work of LGBTQ people were posted online on social media platforms without their consent, both by police and by private individuals. Lastly, in terms of violation of privacy, we also noted instances of account hacking and sharing of non-consensual images. The hacking of accounts was often done with the purpose of gathering data that people feared could then be mined for blackmailing. As I've mentioned, blackmailing was one of the key ways in which the LGBTQ community was noted to have been targeted in Uganda. All the data and messages that were stored on people's devices and social media accounts were being used by blackmailers to create what could be used as quote unquote evidence of the person belonging either to the LGBTQ community or being associated with LGBTQ people and organizations in some way. Incidents of blackmailing were also noted to have increased after the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, as LGBTQ people now risk being arrested and charged under draconian provisions if they were to resist the attempts by blackmailers. In fact, in some instances, interviewees reported coordinated efforts by local authorities and private individuals to blackmail LGBTQ people. Here we have one of the many instances that we have documented where devices of LGBTQ people have been taken by people and the data is accessed and then used to blackmail people, which has had detrimental consequences on LGBTQ people in Uganda. In terms of the other forms of technology-facilitated gender-based violence that we note in this report, it includes threats of violence and harassment. There was widespread derogatory and offensive language against LGBTQ people in Uganda, which dehumanized and at times encouraged violence against them. It reinforced harmful stereotypes, biases, and in some cases also led to physical attacks against LGBTQ people. Interviewees also told us that the severity and volume of the hateful messages, while it was there before the Anti-Homosexuality Act, it increased drastically since the Anti-Homosexuality Act was passed, and the kind of public discourse that drummed up around homophobic and transphobic public discourse that drummed up while the act was being debated as well. Several LGBTQ people reported receiving death threats in the comments to their social media posts. Threats of death and harm were really viewed by, there was widespread viewing of threats of death and harm against the LGBTQ community. And we have seen videos that have called for LGBTQ people in Uganda, and we should have issued a content warning before, but these videos were really quite dire and gruesome, including suggesting killing them in different ways. I'm not going to go into that because just of the content of those videos. Another common form of attack against LGBTQ people was to accuse them of quote unquote promoting homosexuality, which, as we know, is a provision in the Anti-Homosexuality Act. And that was, we could see that anybody suspected of being from the LGBTQ community was charged online or threatened as somebody who is promoting homosexuality and recruiting children. So coming to the point of this idea of LGBTQ people recruiting children, another major form of technology-facilitated violence that we saw was disinformation campaigns. So disinformation refers to false or inaccurate information that is spread deliberately to deceive or mislead people. And in the Ugandan context, we saw that disinformation campaigns often portray LGBTQ people as being quote unquote un-African, as being influenced by a quote unquote again Western imperial agenda, quote unquote a threat to Ugandan society and culture, and most dangerously, quote unquote, as sexual predators who are recruiting children into sexual practices. And this one about recruiting children, and as we can see, tweets, the image that I have here is in fact, a tweet by the Deputy Speaker of Uganda, again, reiterating this disinformation of LGBTQ people recruiting and sodomizing children. This has had really harmful consequences on people. It's created moral panic. We've seen instances of severe harassment, violence, and discrimination against LGBTQ people as a result of this kind of spread of false information against LGBTQ people. Lastly, we've also noted instances of impersonation leading to physical attacks, where LGBTQ people are entrapped through online fake accounts, and then fake accounts were used by several different people, including relatives, ex-partners, unknown people, as well as state authorities, to get LGBTQ people to disclose information about themselves, which would then in turn be used for blackmailing. So largely, these are the different kinds of online technology-facilitated gender-based violence that we documented in Uganda. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Marco Perolini, to talk a bit about the violations of freedom of association we've noted in Uganda.
Thank you, Shrestha. One of the key findings that we have also included in the report is the impact. So technology-facilitated gender-based violence does not only target individuals, but also there are lots of instances that we documented where organizations in Uganda have been targeted with different forms of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and this has had a detrimental impact on freedom of association. This context is also coupled with very restrictive laws that exist in Uganda. So there is, for instance, the NGO Act from 2016, and this law already gives extensive power to an organization, state organizations, the NGO Bureau, to impose restrictions on NGOs. These laws, coupled with the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2023 and the increasing attacks that organizations have faced, resulted in a context where not only LGBTQI organizations, but also other NGOs protecting the right to health or protecting gender human rights, or organizations where human rights defenders are active, have faced negative consequences in their daily activities. And we have noted particularly three areas of concern. So the first one is that this context has resulted in organizations changing their ways, the way they use digital spaces. And in the context of Uganda, for instance, there are many organizations protecting sexual health and reproductive health. Before 2023, when the Anti-Homosexuality Act was passed, these organizations used digital spaces, for example, for outreach purposes, to reach out to LGBTQ people, including, for instance, in rural areas. They posted the services that they provided on Facebook or other social media platforms. After 2023, they dramatically and significantly changed the way they use digital spaces because of the threats that existed to not only to be attacked, but also to be imposed restrictions from the NGO Bureau. And in fact, the NGO Bureau in 2023 confirmed that there were 26 organizations that were under investigation for so-called LGBTQ related activities. Another consequence that we have documented is the chilling effect, more generally, that these laws have on organizations. The fact that they cannot use digital spaces to raise concerns, for example, regarding human rights or regarding human rights defenders, and obviously this has a detrimental impact on their capacity to defend human rights. And then the third area is also the offline. So there is a connection between obviously online and offline gender-based violence. And we have documented instances where organizations were also targeted offline, including by police. So we documented instances of raids where human rights defenders have been arbitrarily arrested, and where organizations have been deregistered, which means that they cannot legally operate anymore in the country. So here we have a quote that I hope is visible also on the live stream from Michael, who's a health worker, and he explained the impact that technology-facilitated gender-based violence has had on NGOs. So, for example, he said, we used our Facebook page as an organization. We used to post each and every activity that we conducted, but right now we no longer post, and this affects us as an organization. So this actually is a quote of Michael, who spoke about the impact of technology-facilitated gender-based violence on the role of NGOs protecting human rights. So now we have spoken about the context, so the different forms of technology-facilitated gender-based violence affecting individuals, but also organizations. Another area of great concern is the fact that there are very few avenues that people and organizations in Uganda can use to access justice and redress. And it is actually because the Anti-Homosexuality Act has created a context where it's virtually or nearly impossible to report any instance of homophobia and transphobia, including technology-facilitated gender-based violence targeting LGBTQ people, to the police. That is because there is the risk that police then, for example, start an investigation for promoting of homosexuality or for engaging in acts of homosexuality whenever a person or an organization attempt to report instances of gender-based violence. And we have documented widespread fears within the LGBTQ community in Uganda concerning the possibility to report any instance of gender-based violence to police, and in fact instances where police have re-victimized people whenever they tried to report the violence that they had faced. Another area of concern, because we are talking about obviously the digital spaces, is the type of redress that LGBTQ people and organizations can seek from social media companies. So we focused specifically on three tech companies: Meta, TikTok, and X. We have shared our findings before publishing them. With these three companies, we have received a reply from Meta and TikTok, and their replies have been integrating in the report that obviously you can all read because it will be available online. We have identified three major areas of concerns regarding the responsibility of these three tech companies regarding actually their responsibility regarding respecting the human rights of LGBTQ people in Uganda. So the first one is that we have identified a failure to moderate specific content that amount to technology-facilitated gender-based violence, despite the fact that obviously these three companies have specific policies that tackle online violence, harassment, and bullying, for example. We have this very well-known case of the death threats received by the activist Stephen Kabuya, for instance. He reported those death threats to X, and the reply from X was that those death threats did not violate X policies regarding online harassment and abuse. The second area of concern is the challenges that LGBTQ people we met during our research faced in reporting instances of technology-facilitated gender-based violence to social media companies. Meta, for example, in their response said that they have an LGBTQI safety hub, which is available in English and Swahili, which provide information about how to report online violence and harassment. This LGBT safety hub is not available, for instance, in other widely spoken languages in Uganda, including Luganda. And then the third area that we have identified concerns the gaps in content moderation in local languages other than English, and especially in Uganda. We have identified specific instances, for instance, of disinformation campaigns. Again, clinics provide sexual and reproductive health services on TikTok, and this content is still available online and in the publicly available information that TikTok that exists on regarding the human moderation operated by TikTok from March 2023 and March 2024. There is no information regarding human content moderators who moderate content in Uganda. So this is a gap that we have identified in the way these companies operate and moderate content. Then another third area of our findings. So the third area is the impact that technology-facilitated gender-based violence has on a wide range of human rights. The first one, which is, we have already spoke about it, but it's really important, is the chilling effect that technology-facilitated gender-based violence has freedom of expression, and this is because of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, but also a wide range of very restrictive laws that exist in Uganda and that enable state authorities, for example, to engage in mass surveillance, which creates a chilling effect on LGBTQ people and organizations on the type of expression that they can share online. And we have identified several areas of concerns. The first one is, obviously, many people told us how they refrain to share specific information online or even to follow online accounts that may make them perceived to be part of the LGBTQ community. Some of our interviewees said that they deleted social media accounts because of the fears that they had. They had to either be subject to technology-facilitated gender-based violence, or then the fears that they had regarding offline consequences of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Some interviewees said that they stopped using social media altogether, or many of them clearly refrained from discussing human rights issues on social media, in particularly human rights issues concerning LGBTQ people. In a few instances, in 4 instances, our interviewees said that they gave up their smartphones altogether, and they are currently use a button phone, so one of those old phones, because of the fear that they have to use a smartphone to be tracked by state authorities or to be identified and targeted with technology-facilitated gender-based violence by non-state actors. And finally, a last area of concern is also the chilling effect that technology-facilitated gender-based violence has had, particularly on trans and non-binary people who obviously they cannot express themselves, their gender identity or expression online, because that actually would further expose them to the risk of being targeted online and offline. So this is one of the first the impact of TFGBV on freedom of expression, and now Shrestha will talk more about the impact that TFGBV has on another wide range of human rights.
Thanks, Marco. So we've been discussing a bit about the other impacts as well that's come up throughout. But just to summarize, the harms from online attacks, as Marco mentioned, often do transcend the digital space. And being target of some forms of TFGBV, in particular doxing and outing, where your personal information is being revealed online, can lead to LGBTQ people being more vulnerable to physical attacks, to arrests, to evictions, and being ousted by their families, as we have seen in a number of cases that we've documented here. We've also noted cases where online threat can translate into offline violence or create fears that people will be targeted by offline violence. As Marco already mentioned, we've seen the case of Stephen Kabuye, but we have also noted many other instances in our report as well. In addition to direct physical attacks, LGBTQ people also risk being arrested based on their social media posts. Many have been evicted by their landlords, and many have been ousted from their family homes as a result of them being outed and doxed and being targeted through other forms of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. In addition, we've seen that technology-facilitated gender-based violence really impacts the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health for LGBTQ people. People reported severe impact on their mental health, including feelings of depression, fear, anxiety, stress, and at times even suicidal thoughts. being targeted through technology-facilitated violence, often followed by offline consequences, also affected their self-esteem and left them with really poor mental health while simultaneously lacking any psychosocial support at all. As an activist noted, today, if previously we would get 5 cases of depression, today we get 20 cases of depression. In addition to the severe impact on mental health, peer educators and LGBTQ organizations told us that health outreach, mobilization, and delivery, especially regarding sexual and reproductive health, has become very difficult. As Marco mentioned, online and offline attacks, the chilling effect, and the kind of self-censorship that people and LGBTQ organizations have been forced into has really limited the ability of activists, human rights defenders, and organizations to reach LGBTQ people to provide sexual and reproductive rights information. Again, as an activist noted to us, initially, if they could reach about 500 people at a go through one social media post, now because they're forced to move to more private and discrete platforms like WhatsApp groups, they're able to reach maybe like 100, 150 people because everybody is in panic. People are leaving groups, people are unfollowing accounts, etc. And this has really impacted the sexual and reproductive health. And many organizations, international organizations and bodies have already sounded the alarm that the Anti-Homosexuality Act will be causing a real dent on Uganda's effort to address HIV and AIDS. In addition to online and offline impacts and the health impact, we've also documented economic impacts as a result of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So Marco has spoken a bit about this, but LGBTQ organizations that relied on websites and social media platforms to advertise their work, to increase their visibility and attract donors, were forced to censor the updates about their work for fear of their offices being attacked, which in turn has really affected their ability to get funding from different sources. At least in one instance, we noted that previous posts which linked a person to their work on LGBTQ rights was used as a way to temporarily suspend them from work. We've also noted instances where LGBTQ people who are engaged in sex work fear being blackmailed, outed, and doxxed, and this has made it really difficult for them to reach new clients. However, even given these gruesome attacks and impacts that technology facilitated gender-based violence is having on LGBTQ people, which is further strengthened and bolstered through laws such as the Anti-Homosexuality Act, we must say that the LGBTQ community in Uganda has remained absolutely resilient, both in offline and online spaces. This is a quote, not as a part of our research, but something that was documented previously by LGBTQ activists in Uganda, where it says Ugandan Kuchus is a local way of referring to LGBTQ people and sexual and gender minorities in Uganda, are not just sitting back waiting for the rest of the world to step in and save them. Instead, they have organized, mobilized, and led the international community to fight, support, and one day liberate the Kuchus of Uganda. It is exactly this resistance and resilience that is essential to fight the battle to advance LGBTI rights in this country, and the rest of the world can learn from this history of organizing. And we've seen a number of ways in which this has happened. LGBTQ organizations have been at the forefront of documenting human rights violations, at the forefront of international advocacy, of guiding international support and solidarity. Even in the online spaces, we have seen so much resilience and so many digital security tactics being adopted by the LGBTQ community. And this report, this launch, and this space for us is another invitation to the international community to stand in solidarity and to support a community that is already doing so much for itself. Just to conclude the launch and the recommendations that we are making to different authorities based on the findings that we've shared so far, we've made a range of recommendations to different authorities in Uganda, to international and international funding partners of Uganda, to regional and international mechanisms, as well as to social media companies. So, for example, we are calling upon the President of Uganda to publicly acknowledge and protect the human rights of all individuals without discrimination, and to refrain from making statements that perpetuate and incite stigma, discrimination, and violence against LGBTQ people. On To the Parliament of Uganda, we are calling upon them to immediately repeal the Anti-Homosexuality Act and other laws that criminalize various acts and behaviors that discriminatorily impact LGBTQ people. We are also calling upon them not just to repeal laws, but to proactively ensure comprehensive legislative and policy measures to recognize, prevent, document, investigate, and address all forms of gender-based violence, including technology-facilitated violence, and provide redress and report for survivors, LGBTQ survivors. To the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Uganda Police Force, we are calling upon them to end all criminal proceedings and to establish an independent mechanism to conduct effective and independent investigations into allegations of violations faced by LGBTQ people, human rights defenders, and organizations. We're also calling upon the Public Prosecutor's Office in Uganda to immediately and unconditionally drop the charges against anyone prosecuted under the Anti-Homosexuality Act. We're calling upon the NGO Bureau to stop the discriminatory and excessive monitoring of activities just based on their work on LGBTQ rights. To UN mechanisms, we are calling upon them to utilize all opportunities to call on the Ugandan government to immediately repeal the Anti-Homosexuality Act and ensure that LGBTQ people can live without fear and discrimination. We are calling upon the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to urge the Ugandan government to prevent, end, and punish all acts of violence and abuse against LGBTQ people. As international partners, we recommend that you raise the issue of criminalization of same-sex sexual conduct and human rights concerns associated with the Anti-Homosexuality Act and other violations that LGBTQ people are facing. And most importantly, that you support local LGBTQ organizations in Uganda through unrestricted funding and resources so that they can continue their ongoing work and advocacy efforts. Lastly, to social media companies, we are calling upon them to ensure that their reporting mechanisms are adequate and accessible, and that their content moderation capacity is expanded to cover languages that are spoken in Uganda, especially Luganda. Thank you, everybody. I know it was a very long presentation and we've been talking at you for very long, so thank you for bearing with us. Just to break the monotony of so many people talking for so long, we wanted to play a small animation video that we've made about some of the situations that we've seen in terms of the violations that LGBTQ people are facing in Uganda. Let me just quickly share that with you. Sorry, I think there's an issue with the sound. Let me just... Thank you, everyone. Juniper, over to you. Sorry,
Thank
I
you,
see that there was no audio. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Thank you, Shrestha. Thank you, Marco, for that concise summary of this great piece of work. I think for me, one of the things that really stood out about this report and working on it is how, as much as there's so much repression that is going on offline in Uganda, LGBTQ activists and organizations are still doing their best to make the best of these digital spaces because they understand how powerful they are. So despite the criminalization, the discrimination, the stigma, they are staying strong. And we have seen how they've been able to push back on the violations they're facing, be it online for those who feel safe enough, but also in the corridors of the courts. We are seeing the ongoing petition at the Supreme Court, and that in itself is a show of hope, it's a show of strength, that this fight is that they're in this fight for the long run. That said, I think I want to segue into inviting Geoffrey Ongwaro, who is the Program Officer for Policy Engagement and Advocacy at the Uganda Key Populations Consortium. This is one of the fellows that is at the front line of this struggle, not only at the national level, but also regionally and internationally. Geoffrey, Karibu, we're inviting you to just reflect on the key findings of this report, but also the timeliness and why it's important for us to be speaking about this issue, especially now in Uganda.
Yes. Asante. Hello, viewers. Let me start by thanking Amnesty International for this very, very timely and key research. And it is going to be very helpful as a learning, teaching moment for all of us as stakeholders in the human rights of minority groups such as LGBT people. And thank you, Roland, for the invitation. And I'm very, very, very glad I came. I know we had a little bit of a back and forth of the technicalities, but I couldn't have missed this. I just want to say a lot of what has been said is really true. A lot of what was found out, the findings are really, really true. But as Juniper also said, in there, the struggle continues. We've been leveraging on digital spaces to organize, to provide support, to basically to tell one another we are here for each other and we will look out for each other. I would also like, for example, I would like to, for example, say somebody talked about mental health. This has been a space for communities to be able to support one another mentally because we realized that the environment had really taken a toll on the mental health of the community and we needed to do something. We have organizations that have online spaces where they can every week encourage each other. For instance, there's one called Minority Stress Management Class, Me Being Me, where communities are encouraged to join in every Saturday and encourage one another and say, you're not alone, it's going to be fine, you're fine, how to navigate private spaces in spite of your sexual and gender identity expression, and so on. We've had online spaces used by organizations to continue their work, to have meetings, to have community support group activities go on, and so on. But it is true, we've had a lot of negativity online. We've had trolls following people. We've had people threatening others online. We've had individuals masquerading as members of the community. On Grindr, for instance, is one notorious individual called Morris, who has blackmailed so many individuals. And we've had the challenge of warning the community about some of these online spaces like Grindr. Unfortunately, the law has also brought an instance of coming out of many individuals to realize themselves and to seek love, to seek belonging, and in the process get themselves on platforms like Grindr and get themselves into problems. This particular individual, Maurice, masquerades as someone who is looking for a lover. Many have fallen for his tactics, met him physically in very unsafe spaces where he's demanded for money, taken their phones, and so on. Some of them have even brought him into their homes, unfortunately. And we keep asking ourselves, how do we get the community to stop being so vulnerable, to put themselves out there too much? Some of us have heeded, some of us have gotten off some of these platforms completely. Some of us, as said, have muted ourselves in a way. Particularly myself, somebody asked me the other day, you used to be really radical on Facebook. What happened? And I said, I've got to take some care. I am still putting out the message, but I really curate what I say very, very carefully. I also curate my my friends on Facebook, for instance. I have gone to the extent of sometimes blocking certain people on Facebook. They've said nothing, but just to mitigate, I have removed them from being friends with myself so that they do not see my social media posts. We've also had to change platforms sometimes. Many of us in our organizing now have moved off spaces that are not safe and moved to spaces like Signal. But the other day, again, somebody was saying, when you put your picture on Signal, the one that is view once, you can still take a picture. You can still take a screenshot of a Signal view once. And somebody said, oh, so we should stop sharing view once pictures on Signal, because on the other platforms, you can't take a picture of it, but on Signal, you actually can. So we ask ourselves questions every day on how we can navigate safely on digital platforms that have been used, like has been reported in the report, cited in the report, to look for us, to look for activists, to blackmail private individuals, and so on. I'd particularly like to speak to disinformation, and also to say that this started even before the AHA, right? It must be noted that before the AHA, there was a very heightened digital campaign against organizing for LGBTI human rights, against LGBTI individuals, and so on. The disinformation that was passed. But this disinformation comes also from very high-level people, like has been mentioned, the Deputy Speaker of Parliament, whom sometimes I say you can't really blame, because they get fed this information by the general public, and they unfortunately do not really try to find out the authenticity of these claims. In the Constitutional Court petition we gave the judges the evidence. We asked for the evidence that there's this recruitment taking place, but none of it could be provided. Instead, they believed the lies. Some of this disinformation and misinformation has been paraded around by national figures who sit on boards of important national institutions, for instance, like the Uganda AIDS Commission and so on. So we've had these problems. But one thing that wasn't mentioned that is really coming up right now is the attempt to do online conversion therapy. So we've had members of the community recorded on videos being told they should change. We are going to get you help. We're going to do this and that. Can you stop doing what you're doing? Can you stop being what you're being? And things like that. We've had those go on a lot. So, but we've also tried to mitigate. We've tried to even offer post-trauma help. At Uganda Key Populations Consortium, we've had an emergency program, and we've assisted tens of people, hundreds of people. Some of the cases where in your report, people have had to vacate their premises of abroad, and we've tried to assist them to move to safer spaces. But this is short-term assistance. We've tried to offer advice on how to be safe physically and online. We've tried to do all these things. So the report is really timely. This is really still going on, and there's many nuances to it that are still emerging. Like I said, online conversion therapy attempts. We need to keep our eyes open, and we as community organizations are trying our best to make it easier for the community to survive within the environment. So once again, thank you very much. I do have some feedback on the recommendations, and I just texted one of you about it. Maybe we can communicate about that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey, for making time to join us for this report launch. So just two things before we move into the Q&A section of this launch. One, for appreciating that you've highlighted the issue of self-censorship, which personally I feel is just as violent as the overt online and offline harms. The fact that someone is so scared that they cannot speak out or they cannot be their true selves, for me, is just as dire a violation as any other violation that we can see openly. The second thing is to thank you for staying strong in the struggle, despite, we like to joke here that we don't say increasing civic space, because the civic space is already really tiny. But yeah, thank you for staying strong in this struggle. And as Amnesty, we're standing with you, and we're here to amplify whatever you need us to amplify at all levels. I like to think that we are a true ally of LGBTQI activists and organizations in Uganda. That said, I'll open up the floor for questions and for responses by the panelists. I think while I give everyone in the webinar an opportunity to maybe formulate the questions, I can invite Sandra to just kick us off.
Juniper, before we go to Sandra, I just wanted to mention that this is a live broadcast. So just in terms of security risks, unfortunately, we just have to keep that in mind. So whoever is speaking or using their video or real names, just being mindful that it'll be as a part of live broadcast. If you would rather not be featured, then you could just put in your comments through the chat option. But if you do decide to speak or use the video option, please know that it will be a part of live broadcast as well.
Thank you, Shrestha. But also, if you do decide to speak, you do not have to give your name. Yeah. So we can start off with Sandra from her internet, as I'd mentioned earlier. I think, oh, there we go.
Thank you, Juniper, and everyone who has worked on this report. I don't have a question. It was just for me to reiterate some of the things that have been mentioned by Geoffrey Ogwal, but also by the team from Amnesty that did this research report, that this is very timely, and it supports the work that we've been doing at Her Internet in terms of raising awareness around the vice that has become TFGBV, especially affecting the LGBTQ communities in light of the recent law. And sometimes it might be difficult to contextualize the harm, the immense harm that this kind of violence has on people at individual level, but also collectively. I wanted to highlight the fact that when people witness the harm that is happening to their peers, or to activists who are vocal about human rights violations, especially around gender and sexual orientation, some of the people who would have loved to speak up or to support the activists' voices tend to censor, to self-censor as a result of witnessing the harm that has come to them. So this is a very timely report in terms of just contextualizing the kind of violence and harms that are brought not just to individuals but entire communities, because when one person censors, it inadvertently prevents another queer person from accessing relevant information and needs. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, and obviously thank Amnesty for getting this done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. We have someone who has raised their hand. We will allow them to talk, and it's entirely up to them if they feel free enough to mention their name as they ask their question or give their comment.
Thank you. I'm called Moses Murindo Chimbwe. I work with Spectrum Uganda Initiative as the executive director. I want to thank Amnesty and the other colleagues who participated in the findings, and I wanted to also join my voice to fellow comrade Jeff that through the report points to exactly what is happening in the country. But I also want to point out that when we were confronted with the ACA, many organizations teamed up with the technical people in the country, and they formed what we call adaptation strategy. That strategy was intended, to speak to various stakeholders, to speak to authorities, to speak to healthcare workers, but also to do mapping of organizations and the effects of the ACA. And in that component, we decided to put up, guiding principles regarding, digital usage in terms of delivery of healthcare services. And I know there is already a guidance within Ugandan stakeholders of how organizations should deliver, healthcare services, specifically using digital platforms. And I'm glad to confirm that I've seen organizations, conducting webinars on mental health, conducting, outreaches online, but also making, follow-ups to clients using online digital platforms. And I think much as there is censorship, I agree with the report, but also organizations have come up with initiatives of how to use, digital platforms, properly. And I think when you look at the data from UKPC, when you look at data from, individual organizations, we are seeing slowly by slowly people returning to care, people returning to receive healthcare services using this platform. And I think it is clearly important that we need to mention this, that there are ongoing initiatives by different organizations using digital platforms, but there is also guidance from stakeholders on how these platforms should not endanger again the communities we do serve. But I want to join my appreciation, like other colleagues, to Amnesty and colleagues who participated in this report. Some of us who have done advocacy at the national and international level, this is the way to go, especially the recommendations regarding entities that we feel are mandated duty bearers in protection of rights of all individuals, including LGBT people. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses, for the great addition to the launch. We have one question that I think I will direct Roland's and Geoffrey's way. Someone is suggesting that Kenya is safer for the LGBTQ community compared to any other country in East Africa, given the situation in Uganda. Is that true? Is Kenya a safer space compared to Tanzania and other countries in the region?
Thank you so much. I do not know whether that is, it is quickly changing because, as Tigere said earlier, is that in Kenya, criminalization, in as much as it was unsuccessfully challenged when the court declined to strike down the criminalization, it found related sections of the penal code to be consistent with the Constitution of Kenya. So, in other words, we are still not yet there. But again, in the region, we are seeing a lot of, at least, less, discrimination and violence in the country, in Kenya, that is. But again, so much attempt, just like Tanzania and Uganda, to move into, having, similar, criminalization laws that target LGBTQ community. So I'd say that safer, but not yet to celebrate. Yeah, thanks.
I would also maybe say that I think that impression is got because Kenya is more cosmopolitan, more modernized in a way than Uganda, and more and like let me put it crudely. Kenyans concern themselves mostly with making money. They are very capitalistic. They're not going to take too much time. They might try to start by, spending a lot of time looking for who is who and what they're doing, but that's not their preoccupation. In Uganda, it is the opposite. I think we're so idle that we even use it to get money, the preoccupation with looking for these LGBT people and so on. I think Kenya is safer for the more socioeconomically stable LGBT community because maybe you can live in Nairobi, but a lot of our refugees there have found themselves in very dire situations in refugee camps, have experienced violence in the refugee camps in Kenya from fellow asylum seekers and so on, and not very responsive UNHCR sometimes. So I wouldn't say it's really safer for that group, but maybe for someone who is going to say, I'm relocating to Nairobi and I can freely hang out in a gay bar somewhere in Westlands, which I can't do in Uganda now because all the bars now look out for everybody. In that way, socially, it's more friendly in the cosmopolitan Nairobi, maybe, and other cities. Yeah.
Thank you, Roland and Geoffrey. Any other questions as we lead to the top of the hour? Okay, I'll take that as a no, but just to mention that this will remain that this webinar will remain online on the YouTube channel. So should anyone have any questions, they can pop it on there in the comment section and we'll be able to respond either directly or privately. There's someone who monitors that YouTube page. I think it's safe to say that.
Question, Juniper.
Sure,
let me just ask Roland, is what I texted something that maybe we need to discuss here, or that we can do that later? Because I think it's important for us to give a background of how certain if things have changed institutionally in the country. So it would be good for us to know who to target with our recommendations as well. Is it okay if I talk about it, Roland?
You may mention, yeah. Please go ahead, Geoffrey.
So maybe one change that has happened in the last 6 months, 6 months or less or more, is that the NGO Bureau, the institution that we all dreaded, the one where the 26 organizations were put on radar by them and so on, has been dissolved. So government has been kind of like making sense economically of institutions that play similar roles. So the role of the NGO Bureau has been subsumed back into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But we have not been given a very clear understanding of how that's going to work. Is it a department and which department is that going to be that's going to be in charge of NGOs and so on. So we might just have to find out that information and see who to work with within the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Yes. And also, I'm not a scholar of the three arms of government, but or politics, but somehow I think it would be good to do a lot of judicial advocacy with the courts right now. As you know, we are past the Constitutional Court now. We are in appeal in the Supreme Court. And of course, we did get some 1% of a gain in the Constitutional Court in terms of removing the obligation to report for landlords and medical workers. And so that has kind of like freed that space for, especially in the work around access to health, access to LGBT, access to HIV responses and so on. But we still have clauses in the law that make it really complicated, especially the one on promotion, because even a medical worker can be accused of promotion, even though they have been freed from reporting a patient who is LGBTI plus. So Parliament would technically can't repeal the law. I think it's the court then that would direct that. That would, in my opinion, that would be the case. Thank you very much.
Roland, would you like to jump in?
No, thank you, Juniper. I think, thank you so much, Geoffrey. We will really consider, and especially on the NGO Bureau, considering that the decision has not been effected in terms of how we go about maybe putting an addendum and, how we do that in the report. Also, in terms of the courts and all that, there are different processes. Whereby one could be a process where a law has been challenged or something has been challenged, the legislation through the courts, and the courts, make certain sections or, the entire law, or annuls it. That's a different process. But again, there is a process where on its own initiative, Parliament as a legislative body can make or can also, repeal laws through its own motions. There's a political process and a legal process. And sometimes these processes are combined. Sometimes they're actually very separate. So just to look at the different, institutions and the different mandates and powers that they have. Thank you so much, Geoffrey. I think that is very helpful feedback, and especially in a report like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roland and Geoffrey. With 1 minute to go in the allocated time we have for this report launch, I think I can close us off by thanking each and every one of you for joining us for this report launch. We'd not take it for granted that you took time out of your day to come and listen to us for 2 whole hours and also interact with us. We truly appreciate that. And we're thankful that you stuck through the various technological challenges that we faced over the past 2 hours. That said, the report is already online. If you go to the Amnesty International Uganda page, it's at the top of the research work. There's also a press release highlighting what the launch today and the work that we've done. Please interact with it, share it online. There's also social media work that will be going on. Please like, repost, share, tweet or X, just to keep the conversation going and calling on the government of Uganda to repeal AHA 2023 and also respect the rights of LGBTQ Ugandans. One group that I'd like to mention as we close off, I'm sure you've seen the great illustrations that have been featured, not only in the presentations, but also in the report that you will find online, is East Africa Visual Artists. We credit the great work to them, and we're thankful to them for working on that with us in this project. You can Google them. You will see the great work they do around pushing for inclusion and diversity. If you have an opportunity, please feel free to engage with them. They do great work, as you've seen. Everything that has been shared here is in the report. The videos that you've seen here will be online. You can reshare them and you can repost them where you can. With that, unless any other panelist has something to add, I think I can close off this report launch. Yeah. Great job, everyone. And again, many, many thanks for the LGBTQI activists and organizations that have worked with us on this piece of work. Thank you. Asante.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.